Okay, all right, Andrew. I've got a math problem for you.
Okay.
I mean,
not this early in the morning, Sean.
I mean,
please.
I mean, who doesn't wake up and go, you know what, I really want, you flip on a podcast on your commute or wherever, and you're like, you know what I really could use right now is a math problem.
Yeah, no, I don't. I do not.
But I thought, okay, we're gonna throw out a little brain teaser just to get the juices flowing here. All right, and I promise there's a reason for this. Okay, all right. So here's everyone's favorite. Sean and Andrew record 60 minutes of a podcast on Thursday. They record another 45 minutes the following Wednesday. The week after, they record twice the amount of the minutes of a podcast audio from Thursday. But 30 minutes of that time had music in it. How many minutes of audio did Sean and Andrew record? So
the answer is way too much.
Well, certainly, right? So we'll let people think about that, and don't worry, you don't need a calculator. But it's a good exercise, perhaps, to think about that, because there's a very specific reason. Because I thought today we could explore and talk around some of the sort of challenges, but also some of the recent news around whether or not these AI tools that we use and we have grown to love, even in some cases, can they actually do sort of reasoning like a word math problem like this, like they're told.
Yep.
So we'll take a quick pause. We'll run our
intro, then we'll come back to the math.
And so if you're driving or you're thinking right now, you can add this up. So 60 minutes on Thursday, 45 minutes on the following Wednesday, and then double the amount of time of Thursday. And so how many minutes was that? We'll be right back with the answer. Okay, so I'm curious, how admittedly it's early. I cheated because I wrote that all down, and otherwise I'm curious if you got the answer right. Do you know what the answer is?
Well, actually I don't know, because I think I'm missing something here. Okay. But it's going to be around about 3 hours 45 minutes or something. But my chain of thought reasoning is not working that well. I used to be able to do this when I was 15. But.
Right. Okay, so we'll step through it really quickly. Yeah. And then I want to bring something up, and we'll talk about it. And then we'll come back to this. Okay. So setting up this word problem, right? It sounds like a lot of these types of problems, right? They're meant to sort of, it's not presented as a straightforward equation. Right. You're like, okay, we have to reason through.
Think through.
Yeah, we have to reason through this issue and figure out what are the actual elements, what are we trying to solve for, et cetera. Okay. So the total thing, what we're looking for is how many minutes of audio did we record in this little prompt. So we know we have 60 minutes from Thursday. Okay. So we have 60 plus 45 minutes. And then the third piece here is that we recorded twice the amount of minutes from Thursday. So that was 60. So twice is 120.
Yep.
Right. And then we have this little dangling piece there that says, but 30 minutes, and this is classic, right? That this is just erroneous information meant to kind of like
confuse you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, what do you do with that 30?
It's the evil thing that the assignment setter puts in.
Right. So what do we do with that extra 30 minutes? Well, in this case, it's just saying that of that time, 30 minutes had music in it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's irrelevant because we don't really care if it, it just asks us how many minutes of audio, which includes that. So, so if we think about that, so we have 60 plus 45 plus 120, which gives us the magic number of 225.
Okay.
So if anyone, had gotten that in their mental math, congratulations.
Yes.
I just in Google
Which
Docs,
is 3 hours, 45 minutes. Yes.
There we go. Right.
Just to show that I actually did get it.
Good. And I will give you a golden star if I had one. Well done. Okay. So the reason I gave you this little math, prompt, is there has been essentially some good press around a white paper, which doesn't often normally happen around white papers. But essentially there was a really interesting paper that came out in the middle of October from researchers out of Apple.
Apple, yes.
Yep. And so what they released was essentially this paper looking at and sort of calling into question, can large language models, so LLMs like that, generative AI tools like
ChatGPT and Claude,
can they actually reason through some of these problems, right? And this also, of course, comes in many ways sort of comes on the heels of a lot of the hype and excitement around AIs. In fact, maybe even specifically a shot at OpenAI's the Strawberry model, O1 and O1 Mini.
It's O1, which is designed with chain of thought reasoning. They've actually got a slight addition to the model that supposedly allows it to go through exactly the sort of steps you went through with solving this math problem.
Break it apart and solve it and things like that. But what was interesting is, and of course, we'll link the paper and some other resources around this so people can go and actually dig into, because the paper I thought was actually really, it was very interesting, and it's chock full of examples and the datas, and even, perhaps even the appendix at the end, and I thought was kind of the most fun, because you could actually go through and see all the different sort of problems. But here's the idea. Essentially, and this is a quote that I pulled from one of the senior authors. I'm gonna attempt the name, so apologies already for mispronouncing it. But Mehrdad Farchabar, I think that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to try. Apologies there. But
please write in and tell us if Sean was wrong.
Well, we know I was wrong, I think. But here's the quote. We found no evidence of formal reasoning in language models. Their behavior is better explained by sophisticated pattern matching. So fragile, in fact, that changing names can alter results by as much as 10%. And so I think this is a really big piece for us to pay attention. Now, this doesn't, of course, mean we throw all the incredible work around. It doesn't mean we throw it away.
There's a question here around what we expect these LLMs to do, but yes.
And so one of the examples that they have given in this paper for, and I do want to back up, because there is one. So in these sort of papers, they are very dense, right? These are papers done by data scientists, people working in this field. And so they throw things around. And so you'll see a lot with, if you look at papers or articles talking about you'll come across this GSM-8K.
Right.
And it's like, oh yeah, okay.
So yeah, Sean, what is GSM-8K?
Well, I have it written right here, because otherwise, it's exactly like, what on earth is that? But it's the shorthand that refers to, it's literally called grade school math. So there's your GSM. 8K, which it's 8,000. So it is a data set of essentially grade school math problems.
Yes. And these are used to test kids to see sort of where their mathematical reasoning is, correct?
Yep. And these have also been now used as, because it was an existing set of data, has now been used, and I think it's widely used in AI model training. As a way of, because we know we have, and it's split, I forget the exact specifics, but within that 8,000, it's like 5,000 of it is like basically just training data, and whatever the balance 2,500 plus or whatever that makes 8 is like the sample data where you can see the exact testing. And so it's a well-known data set. But I think, and for those of us who've been talking and sort of questioning, especially like LLMs for a while too, there's an ongoing challenge of, at some point, haven't these systems already learned everything from the system? And nothing is new.
That's right. Yes.
And so I think,
but it's important to say that the researchers actually tried to address that, even though they think that this is part of an issue.
Yes. And so one of the things that's really interesting then is, so then they take these. So taking on this basis of, okay, these reasoning models are supposed to go through and break these problems apart, and sort of walk through them, just like I was clumsily, doing with my example, which models one of the examples that they use. But then what was interesting was simply adding additional information or changing the names of people in there would, again, essentially break the accuracy of the models.
Or it reduced it. We should come to this, because it's not as if they failed miserably. It's just that they weren't as good as people were expecting.
Yeah. And I guess it depends on also, the way I was interpreting it too, right, is if especially when you're doing like a mathematical problem, for example, if you reduce the accuracy, it's just wrong.
Right.
So, like, if the answer is 10 and you get 9,
right,
it's like that's, you might as well get a 4.
But you can see, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, because I come from a background in physics and math where it's your working which is the important thing, not necessarily the result. So we will end up talking a little bit about the process versus the actual absolute accuracy of the numbers that the models got.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. I mean, I think I mean, I remember my journey through, mathematics and, primary school and college and university or whatever. Yeah, so that's why you show your work.
That's right.
Because, if you boff it and you get the wrong actual value, you're like, I screwed something up along the way. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes,
and you're like, you can demonstrate, I knew what I was doing. I made a mistake somewhere along the way. And, so please give me my partial credit for that, because I need it.
Because you need every point.
That's right. This is a fight, man. I get every point on there. But it is interesting. And I think for me, I think one of the really interesting and cautionary pieces that this raises, and again, I think there's a lot of things today we can talk about that are kind of coming full back to the conversation that we had launched with episode 4 around Can Machines Think About? Because in there we raise, and we can, if you haven't listened to that and go back, it's a great, if I do say so myself, it's a great episode with Andrew and I. But we raise this idea of the challenge of this mythic idea of, and again, this is one of the things that, I start to get my defenses up against the hype that's being sold that these reasoning models are so good that they can replace X, Y, and Z.
So here, I actually think it's worth taking a step back. So first of all, let's say that the paper is fantastic.
Yeah.
It asks a really clear question, and it demonstrates that these models aren't reasoning like a human would, and they're fragile. Although at the same time, they tested a variety of models, and they're getting the answers right between 60 and 80% of the time. So actually, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
But it seems to be very clear that, as the paper said, and as you read out at the beginning, they're looking at pattern recognition. They're emulating reasoning, but they're not
doing
actually reasoning.
Yeah.
And this is really important to me, because I think people that develop these models, if you get them sort of in a corner and say, cone of silence, tell me what you think, they'll say, no, of course they're not reasoning.
Of course not.
It goes back to this idea of the stochastic parrot. They basically sort of work out what is the statistically most likely sort of sequence of words, whatever, that come out. It's just that they're incredibly good at emulating what humans do.
Yeah.
But if you start from that perspective, why on earth would they be good at math if they're just looking at patterns?
Yeah, because what is math?
Right.
I mean, it's just, a 6 is a what compared,
That's right. So they're really good at sort of looking at all their training data and sort of saying, okay, yes, based on all this gazillion bits of information in the training data, it looks like if I get a problem like this is likely to be the answer.
Yeah.
And if you run that normally, they're pretty good. But as this research showed, if you fiddle around with the prompt, you can reveal some of the limitations in that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting. So one of the, I'll just pick on one of them. One of the examples that they used is around picking kiwis, the fruit, not not our friends from New Zealand.
Right.
And so here was the prompt, and you'll recognize my prompt here as well. So the prompt is Oliver picks 44 kiwis on Friday. Then he picks 58 kiwis on Saturday. On Sunday, he picks double the number of kiwis he did on Friday. But 5 of them were a bit smaller than average. How many kiwis does Oliver have? And of course, so it goes through the same thing, and and you can kind of see the steps and how, for example, this one was 01 mini, how it broke it out, and it was, 44 on Friday, 58 on Saturday, and it got, so Sunday it knew that it was twice so it was 2 times 44, so it has 88. But then it subtracts the 5. So it interprets, again, this is meant to be, this is erroneous information. It doesn't matter the size. We don't care.
But it tried to incorporate it into it.
And interesting, the number, the value of 5 was written as the word 5, not the symbol 5. But it took that as signal that I should subtract 5 from them because it just interpreted it on its own. And so it gives you an incorrect answer, right? So it has the total amount less the 5 total kiwis.
Yes.
And same thing they did with Llama 3, and it was basically the same exact results. Did the same thing. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll try mine. And so it was interesting. So because also this came out, again, mid-October, and I'm always curious what the response time is anytime there's a big splash or a headline news, like how fast are the engineers
just tweaking the system? I know.
Now we know we're going to get all these questions. So I went back. So I that same word problem about podcasting minutes, I fed ChatGPT. I did O1 Mini, same thing. And yeah, it got it wrong in the exact same way. It did.
Yes.
So if you remember my example, right? It did the same thing. It added the time up and then it subtracted. It didn't subtract. Actually, let me pull it up. I actually have it right here. It added, because I had mentioned 30 minutes had audio or music playing. So it added 30 minutes in addition to it.
But here's something that really strikes me. So we're assuming that we've got a human model here that thinks in a logical sequence to be able to solve this. And we've now got a machine that just looks at patterns and gets it wrong because of the information it's fed. However, when you look at humans, two things strike me. One is you've got to ask how many people could do this in the first place. And as I said, I live and breathe math and physics, but I can feel my anxiety sort of welling up in me just thinking about these sort of questions. I hate them because I'm really anxious about whether I've missed something. But also we know that humans have got all these bundles of cognitive biases. Most of the time, we do not think in logical sequences. We think in terms of pattern recognition and sort of almost instinctive or learned responses to things. So if you look at that part of human behavior, and if you're looking at the sort of the proper terminology, it's the system one behavior, it's the learned behaviors. You could understand that the machines are doing pretty much what humans do. We look at patterns and we make snap decisions on those patterns. So
I've seen this before. I know what that.
That's exactly it. So yes, while I would contend that we're not seeing reasoning here, we're just seeing pattern recognition as the researchers really illustrated. It's not that dissimilar from what most humans do if they're not in that system to logical thinking mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think what's interesting on the version that I ran, I was curious too, because it had been a couple of weeks since that paper was out. So clearly there was development time that people could respond. And it's interesting what I really liked about it though, was the way it sort of broke out the answer,
right?
Because it shows, again, it's getting points for showing you the work, because it shows you, and I don't know here, I'm going to tilt my screen to Andrew
so you can actually see this,
but you can see how it sums up the minutes and it breaks them down and it shows, and it says, so it gets it correct in one way, but then we'll add an additional, you can see exactly where it went wrong. So all you would have to say is like, well, no, those 30 minutes are erroneous. And then it's correct.
So now what I want to know is, can you train it? Like you would a child, can you go into using ChatGPT and say, look, this is what you did right, this is what you did wrong. Now let's try another example.
And I think this is one thing that mirrors some of the findings of the paper, which was that these models are sensitive. Because I did a different question that was very similar but slightly different, and I was thinking about mental math. So these are things like I use like 4 and 8, so you can add them easily. So for example, Sean listened to 4 podcasts on Thursday, another 3 on Friday, and over the weekend he listened to 2 podcasts that were focused on comedy. How many? And it got it right. It had no trouble with that one. And it followed the reasoning and even broke down, and even the response in that one even said, the genre of the podcast doesn't matter. So again, I think it is really fascinating to see how these models are responding. And, fragile, I think, is a very, almost like a clinical term in the sense that, again, if you have to get that answer perfectly right, maybe not, right? But
if you're building an airplane, you really don't want it. Sort of 50% of the time, it's sort of roughly right.
I was gonna do a Boeing joke, and I'm just not.
No.
But yeah, I mean, that's it, right? So, but the fragility is also an avenue for exploring how fantastically wild they are in some ways, because why did it get that one right, but it didn't understand the other one?
Right. Yes.
And then you can start digging into, again, that's the tokenness of it. Like what words, which characters, which things spawned in the way that it goes through that sort of that process of identification.
Yeah. So just as you're saying this, you can see sort of two camps forming. You've got the camp of people who say this should be accurate. This should be a truth machine. And if it's not giving us the truth, it's broken.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other camp, which I probably sort of sit within, that say, I'm not really interested in the absolute truth. I'm just interested in the incredible ways it's emulating an awful lot of what humans do with all of the messiness that comes with that.
Yeah. And I think what this does, or at least what I'm hoping it's going to do, is get people to think about, depending on where they sit with that, right? Because a machine can do, we have programmed in the calculation of these numbers. That's a no-brainer. Even literally as I was typing in Google Docs, it did the calculation for me because it recognized I was doing 60 plus 40 plus, and it summed it automatically.
Can I just say something about that as well? So that is a different form of AI.
Totally.
And people have actually written about this. Gary Marcus was one that really sort of pulled this out. If you go back sort of before sort of neural nets as to how AI was working, it was a set of rules. And this is similar to what Google uses when it uses those rules to do that calculation.
Yeah.
But LLMs don't follow that sort of rule-based approach. They follow this pattern-based approach. But then the question comes, can we merge those two approaches together or even put other approaches in? So now you're getting almost this composite AI brain that can do different things in different ways.
Yeah, I hope that is in the future because I think that you raise a really good point and that's kind of where I was headed with this idea of, machines have no problem calculating these values. Your calculator does this just fine, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But when you're asking something that's based on token of words and probability, that's not the same as asking it to do a mathematical calculation.
Right.
But when that's our question, then it raises this idea and that's where it would be really fascinating to see a more holistic sort of machine interface where it can understand and recognize I need to do calculations here. That's for Bill to do.
Right.
That's for my AI. That's for AI Bill to do.
That's right. Yes. This little family of sub AIs inside the box.
That's not me.
Yes,
that's the man. That's the
Hey, Bill.
That's Bill.
What for you?
I'll handle the word stuff.
But actually, but then what you're describing is a system where you've got the first AI that passes things out. It works out sort of who should this request, this package go to within this whole array of different talents inside. And that feels remarkably similar to sort of how we're beginning to understand the human brain in terms of how things are passed out.
We pass it off to this is, we have, this is, again, Q, I wish we could like summon a, cognitive science, but exactly. We process different parts of signals and input in different parts of our brain.
Yes.
Why would we want or expect a machine built with one type of functionality to then do everything?
Right. Yes.
And I'm fine with that. My thing, I think, I will climb upon this horse and ride it into the sunset on this one, is I think it's beautiful that we have machines that can do all kinds of different things and wild. The problem I only have with it is when people are telling you like, no, it can reason. It comes back to that hype. It comes back to selling the myth of what it is versus enjoying the beauty of what
it actually
has been created.
Yes.
I think it does a disservice also when you say like, oh, these things can do reasoning. No, let's not say that. Why don't we say more accurately, these things can demonstrate a thought process that mimics these elements.
They can simulate aspects of it, which is incredibly powerful. But it's a simulation.
And that's it. And
at
that,
the moment.
Yeah. And sure, exactly. Until it's not.
Right.
But that then gives us something that we can champion and really get behind because it feels transparent and honest, as opposed to marketing hype being sold some wishy-washy blob of AGI people keep changing the definitions of.
But here's the challenge here. So if you step into the shoes of the CEO of an AI startup who has got to raise funds, there's got to be a certain level of hype there. This is how tech startups work.
Yeah.
You've got to base funding on the promise of what's coming, and it's known that you always sort of push things out a little bit, which to me is fine. That's how you play the game. The difficulty is when consumers are investing in this or institutions are investing in this, and they don't see the difference between the hype designed to raise funding versus sort of what they're being sold. And that, to me, begs the question, to what degree do we need to completely rethink how we approach AI literacy? So people actually understand this landscape. They understand what they're getting rather than what they think they're getting.
I mean, I think I would say, and I would guess I'm not alone, but I would say I think the time of that was 2 years ago.
Right.
10 years ago.
I know.
But I think it is, I mean, it is of utmost importance, especially as, again, when you have people who don't know all the parts, who then take these ideas and go, oh yeah, I'll just enter, I'm going to use that, these systems as a replacement for how I would normally actually work through, because it's
and you trust it,
and then that trust is misplaced. And that, I mean, again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in episode 4, but it's the same problem of like, that is a very dangerous scenario where people are using something with putting trust in it where they really should not. And then are having real world consequences.
So let's push that out a bit. So if you're doing math, it's easy. You run it, you get a wrong answer. It is demonstrably wrong. So if you trust in it, somebody can sort of show you where that trust is misplaced. What if you're using it for something more subjective? I don't know, sort of anything from sort of learning about history or moral philosophy, or something like that, where what you get back just feels right. It feels compelling. It is so well articulated that you have to put a lot of effort in to distrust it. But what if that is wrong? Because then you don't have the same checks and balances.
Absolutely. And I think so that actually branches into something else we can fold into this conversation too, because I mean, that element of, again, I use the word knowing that it's going to make some people's skin crawl with the hallucinations. And but we're going to set aside whether I should or should not anthropomorphize things. I'm just going to do it. But I think that's always been at play because we've heard these arguments a lot. And I think they are even more, more important to pay attention to now than even ever before. Even if it gives you a wrong answer or a factually incorrect answer or just completely made up, it does it in such a sort of well-written tone of authority that reads as if we're used to reading from a trusted authoritative source.
That's it. It feels right.
It feels right. And when you look at it, unless you are a deep subject matter expert, you don't have a reason to say, oh, that's complete BS. Because it does. It fits with what, the question, the prompt that you may have asked. It fits and it will provide factual, I'm using air quotes again, right? Factual information as to how you would read it. This study showed blah, blah, blah. And they're like, there was no study. It didn't exist. But again, it's not about knowledge. It's about creating words.
That's it. Words that are designed to feel as if they're right.
And so for me, I mean, this is, again, I think one of the parts where I get excited about potentials in the future is I want to see us leaving behind the LLM end all be all. It's great at words and it should live with words. And I would like to see more systems come up that are focused more on properly doing reasoning and
the hard stuff.
The hard stuff, right? Or being able to create very like a suite of AI tools that they themselves are very narrow. I'll give an example. Any graduate student that's out there, and anyone who does any academic writing whatsoever, when you have to make your citations, if you're not using, for example, like a citation manager or whatever,
this is a sore spot for me, by the way. But carry on, and then I will crush you.
It's awful. It's so tedious. And it would be so nice to be able to be like, take this. Here's the work. Throw it in. Please give me the APA 7th edition version of the citation, and it sometimes gets you most of the way there. oftentimes, it's like I want to use it as a time-saving activity,
right.
but then
the amount of time it takes to correct what it gets
wrong.
wrong.
Just do it the right way the first time.
No, and I agree with you there. The reason why you are sort of getting my hackles up is I fundamentally dislike either Chicago style or APA or any of these, simply because they constrain you. Sorry, this is a total tangent.
Sure,
but when
if we've proved nothing, we love tangents. So let's bring it. Let's do it.
And actually, this does get us back to AI, because I think sort of that the intent in the process is important here in many cases. But with citations, I teach my students the most important thing with a citation is the reader can go back to the original source. You need to provide enough information in the right in a format that they understand to get there. Within that, I think there's a huge amount of flexibility with how you do that. As soon as you say you have to follow a certain style where we're going to ding you if there's a full stop or a comma in the wrong place,
you have to italicize.
Yes, you've lost sight of the purpose of the citation.
Yeah,
and yes, I know
agree.
there are arguments as to why standardization is useful here.
Sure.
But I always think we've got to keep sight of why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Same with the AI systems. Yes, they can sort of give you stuff which is creative. But if you keep your eye on what you're truly trying to achieve, you can actually be flexible within a wide range of creativity, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, but again, I think what I would love in the future, like even near term, like products, is something that is a highly disciplined, highly trained system where I can do just that.
Yes.
Like that has incredible value to me. What doesn't have value to me is, like personally, I pay for ChatGPT, and that's great. But that doesn't work for me.
Right.
And then, like you said, it ends up being more work.
What you need it to do.
It ends up being more work. And and if you ever did trust it, then you have this little dangling doubt where you're like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Was that right? Because again, that's the point is if someone reads that paper and they're like, wait, you cited who for this? That can't be
and of
right.
course, I mean, in the early days, there are a number of cases like this. I've seen them decrease, but still there is that danger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And this brings us back to AI literacy.
Yeah.
I mean, how do people get a sense of where they can use these and trust them versus where they shouldn't be trusting them?
Yeah.
And I don't think we're there yet at all.
No. And I think, if someone were to ask me today, like, what's the safest way I can use this without getting? I'm like, use it as a writing partner to like help you come up with brainstorming.
Yes. Yep.
I've got this paragraph of text that I wrote. Make this into 200 words only,
right,
or whatever. Or like, how do I appeal this to an 8th grade reading level versus high school reading level?
So there's some really good news here. I was actually talking to my undergraduate students this week about exactly this. I was asking them, how do they use LLMs like ChatGPT? And actually, most of the responses were pretty smart in terms of using it as an aid to sort of clarify their own thinking, to sort of explore an area where they can actually do fact-checking afterwards, to clean up their writing. Especially, if English is their second or third language, this becomes an incredibly powerful tool. And I think every student said they would actually go back and check the work to make sure that it actually captured what they were trying to say.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
I think that sort of this generation beginning to evolve that set of competencies. But of course, I think there's still an issue where we need to look at where there are gaps in that and how we might begin to help people address them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting because, just like with a lot of these sort of like tectonic plate shifting technologies that are massive, right? Is that every year from now, basically from 2022 onwards, right, is a new group of students or professionals or whoever who now have had this at their, at their fingertips, literally, and exploring. So it is different. And to pretend like it's not going to be there is obviously not the, not the right way to do it. But so another piece that's been in the news recently that I'll bring in because I think it's related about this idea, again, of trust and literacy and how do we think about these things, especially when they have perhaps some of the most impactful dangers. I don't know if I'll be hyperbolic here. Whisper AI in medical records.
Yes.
Or medical. So for people who I've used Whisper AI for quite a while. They have a wonderful standalone
And we should say that this is their text-to-speech interface or speech-to-speech interface.
Yes. And so Whisper AI, you can use it for free. I think I paid for a version that runs locally on my machine. And what it's phenomenal, especially they have different size models. Their larger model that takes, some time to download is incredibly accurate. And what it does is, so for my use case for it was always passing either video or audio into it and having it generate a transcript.
Right.
It's fast. It's incredibly accurate, and runs locally on device, so you don't have to worry about sending things into a cloud or having it ingested into
right, and it's suddenly popping up somewhere else.
Exactly. And it's really good, but it's not perfect, and it makes mistakes. And so it was interesting. There was an article recently that was talking about the use of essentially audio, like basically open microphones being recorded in
so
medical.
This is a doctor and a patient, or a medical professional and a patient, and they were using this to sort of take the notes, whereas normally somebody would be sitting there.
So they're transcribing, and we've all probably experienced this when you're sitting in the doctor's office and they're like asking you questions while looking over their tablet, or they're sitting in the corner on their desktop, like typing away, and you're like, okay, all right. So, so again, the intent there is better human to human interaction with your physician or medical provider, and letting this system listen to what's happening and transcribe the notes. Sounds great. Although, unfortunately, anything that uses these types of models, as we know, are prone to inserting things that don't belong, because, or again, to use the term,
seems to fit the pattern, but actually wasn't there in the first place.
Exactly right. And so again, you have this issue of hallucination. I'll use air quotes again. But now you're having it in a situation where, I'm the patient, and I'm explaining, like, this has been happening to me. I don't know what's going on. And you're going, oh yes, well, in my experience, blah, 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 whatever. But you then refer to your notes, and it has things that maybe the patient has said that was not true or was not.
And actually, something that's not clear. It was a little while ago since I read these reports. In these applications, do you recall whether the AI is creating a supposedly accurate transcript, or whether it's summarizing it to capture the essence of the conversation?
That I don't know.
Right.
Because and as a user of it, I've seen it both ways.
Right. Yes.
So Whisper by itself doesn't summarize. It only provides the transcription.
Yes.
But even there, it's amazingly accurate, especially with the larger models.
Yes.
But again, in this particular study, which the hospital that this was done in, I don't know what model they were using, for example. But even then, it does get things wrong.
Right. Yes.
And and again, for things that I'm using it for, it's like, oh, how silly, they said dog instead of cat, right? Which is not a big deal.
But when it said sort of either operate immediately or do not operate,
remove left leg,
right.
But again, it just. And again, it's one of those things where, like, these tools, you can see how these would be incredibly beneficial.
Yes.
It's not there yet.
Yep.
But again, it sort of comes back to that idea of being careful around the level of trust,
realizing what the
things.
limitations are before you go sort of full steam ahead in adopting them.
That's right. And maybe even, potentially, I think this would be a good practice. I don't know how many people get to see the notes that are taken of their visit. I don't know.
Yes.
Because that would be an interesting thing too, is to be able to have basically, like, both parties agree, like, yes, that was accurate.
Right.
Because
although it's also a lot of extra work. Who has the time to do that? Yes.
And how much to go through.
Yeah.
But then if there is something wrong, I can only imagine the nightmare of trying to get that corrected.
I know the legal side of things as well. Yes, who is liable?
Who's liable?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. No, it's incredibly.
But all of this comes down to me to understanding sort of what the envelope of limitations is around these systems, sort of where you can use it in very effective ways, where there's a gray zone, and where there's a line where at the moment you probably don't want to trip over. And it seems incredibly important to understand that envelope and how it's changing.
Yeah. And again, it's that, and I hope, and I can't remember from when I read that article of what the sort of the final, output was in terms of how they're handling the hallucinations with those patients. But it would be curious to see like, moving forward, because again, you can see if the accuracy of this thing is into the 9999999.
Right. That's
how
right.
great.
Yes. And of course, again, we should have the paper in front of us. But this is a very academic thing where you can sort of say there's an error, there's a problem here, statistically relevant problem or statistically significant problem. And you find that it's the difference between sort of 99 times correct versus 99.5 times correct or whatever.
Yeah.
So you've got to put things into that context. But still, the reality is that when you've got critical applications, the bar for accuracy and the bar for trustworthiness is exceptionally high. And I'm actually not sure that we're having the conversations we need to have around what is critical. So, for instance, you look at education.
Yep.
To what degree can we afford to make mistakes with AI in educational apps? I would argue we've got to be really careful because especially, I know if you look through K through 12, the number of people I know who have got stories where they say they had a bad year with a teacher that really wasn't responding to them, it has a knock-on effect through their whole life. And so we can't afford to sort of say, whoops, we made a mistake with this AI app. Let's just correct it. Now you've got a whole generation that is trying to play catch up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would be curious. Do you see a future of this where there is some sort of like certification agency that can so if I'm trying to
see me grimacing.
I know, I can hear it, feel it. But I wonder about that because I'm like, how. Let me think about how to put this question into words that'll make sense on the other end of this microphone. How do we demonstrate trust?
Yes.
Or, I mean, you can put trust in air quotes as well. But when a system claims to be able to do something, and again, where it's using it for fun for social media, it has a threshold of a 70% accuracy, or I'm just making this up. I'm hallucinating. I'm making this all up.
This whole podcast.
Do we all exist anyway? I don't know. But then when you get obviously into very serious, like, judicial systems, medical systems, things that the output of them are life altering.
Right. So actually, there is some good news here. If you're looking at some critical applications, so say medical systems, for instance, medical applications, there are legal checks and balances. So the FDA has got certain requirements you have to go through, irrespective of what the technology is. So there, I think we are able to either utilize existing systems or extend them to make sure that the technologies that are used in certainly critical health applications are reasonably robust. But there are other areas. Education is a good one where you don't have quite so robust a set of checks and balances. And there, I'm always reticent to sort of turn towards sort of regulators and sort of strict rules or certifications because they're incredibly limiting. They stifle innovation to a massive degree if you're not careful. And they also encourage people to abdicate responsibility if they say it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. I think there needs to be a combination where I actually do think you need either regulations or a set of standards that set the hard boundaries beyond which we probably shouldn't be going, but they should allow a lot of space internally for experimentation and creativity, with the onus on individuals and organizations to think critically about what they're doing. And we're back to critical thinking now. Yes.
Well, it was, I mean, as you were talking about that, I was thinking too of like, this is where we've come with a lot of cybersecurity measures in terms of encryption, right? There's certain standards that are met that are essentially, in some ways a way of proving it will do what it's promising to do.
Right.
And if not, then there's some kind of, there's some way to recoup the risk that you incur. But yeah, no, it's really, and regulation is at some point, maybe we need to have we need to maybe have a long talk about regulation.
Right. Yes. Maybe another day. But
it is because often usually the problem, right, is that regulation is often a hindsight reaction to something that's
right. Yes.
small, and then you create you have
that gap, and sort of our colleagues have written about this that gap between what a regulation or what a suite of regulations can do and where the technology is. But we've got to find ways of filling that gap because regulations aren't going to catch up. Right. That gap's going to get bigger.
let's I want to squeeze in one more thing.
Okay.
One more thing to talk about. It's AI related, of course. this conversation today is. But so we've got this idea of if we kind of bridge what we were just talking about in terms of the hallucinations and making things up. What about a future in which AI is sort of interjecting itself between two people?
I know where you're going with this.
And
yes. Yep.
making things up that you aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
So, for example, you and I are on a video, Skype or Skype. Wow, I just said Skype for the first.
That does anybody use Skype anymore?
Microsoft killed Skype. Wow, that was funny. I meant to say Zoom, and the word that came out was Skype. Wow, that's going back to 2010. Wow, look at that. See, I really am hallucinating.
Right.
I live in a world where Skype is still a viable product. But yeah, so we're on a video. How do you know that the Andrew that I see, who's always smiling,
is really me?
Is really
you. There's a paper here that we're sort of going to get to, which actually begins to dive into this. But you think about it, you're looking at a computer screen. So you're on a Zoom call or some other sort of video conferencing app, and you see all these videos of other people. And we've trained our minds to assume that what we see is reality. But it's not. It's just a bunch of pixels on a screen that we're interpreting as a person. And that means that this is open for manipulation. We have no idea whether what we're seeing is the true video feed from that person or whether it's somewhat being manipulated. And of course, this comes back to sort of whether AI can interject and actually change how we're seeing the person, and then how that leads to how we respond to them. So, which is a nice segue into this piece of research that was published very recently on this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, this is so much fun because also, I mean, this, for me, one of the things that this tickles also is just sort of this philosophical understanding, right? I mean, even a photograph, right? You can argue is not an exact, it's not true, right? Right. That is a negotiation essentially between the subject, the photographer, the medium, the technology, etc. But the intent is to reproduce something that is as close to real as possible, right? Unless it's obviously they're not doing that, right?
Yes.
But that raises this wild question when you're in a computer mediated communication like a Zoom call. I got it right that time. The expectation is what you're seeing is an accurate representation of the person on the other side.
We've already got these filters here. So people sort of put on the filters to sort of make themselves look sort of, I don't know, because I don't use these, slightly more attractive. They sort of iron out the wrinkles. They make you look.
Makes it look like they put, it's the digital equivalent of putting Vaseline on a lens. Right. It makes it a little smeary and blurry.
But then you look at this study, and so this study, which again we'll put in the show notes, the link to it, is fascinating because it didn't set out to look at the impact of AI in manipulating video images. It was a psychology study that was interested in how body language and especially sort of facial features like smiles affect how people feel about each other when they're interacting. And we know that there are sort of these sort of correlatable relationships between sort of body language and how we sort of begin to build those relationships. But it's almost impossible to test these for causative relationships in real life. So, for instance, me and you sitting here, somebody couldn't run a study where they sort of have a little earbud sort of telling you to sort of smile or frown and then measuring my response to that, because it would just feel false and inauthentic. So you can't intervene in real life. You can just observe what's happening. But these researchers realized that when two people are interacting on video, they can use AI to subtly manipulate their facial features without the participants knowing.
And that's the crazy part.
It is. So the setup was, this was a sort of made up dating app. And they recruited these 30-odd people to be part of this. All of them were single, heterosexual, and they knew that they were going to have 4 minutes speed dating with somebody via video.
Okay.
But they knew nothing else about it. Now, the researchers used artificial intelligence to change their smiles. So, and then sort of measure the response to that. So they could either make both of the participants smile at the same time. They can make one smile and one not smile, and so on and so forth. And then they asked them before and afterwards sort of how attracted they were to this person. Before was how attracted you think you'll be to this person, and afterwards they asked how attracted were you, and a bunch of other things. And it turned out that by using the AI to manipulate facial features, they could manipulate the degree to which somebody was attracted to the other person, that they actually wanted to spend more time with them, that they felt this was a good, strong connection. And they were utterly unaware of any of this going on.
This just opens up so many ideas and questions, right?
Right.
And we've seen this, well, not this, but we've seen this before. And of course, you mean video, we know the role that can play in sort of like social presence and all these kind of things, right? But also, but it's the not knowing of how an intermediary
that's right. Yes,
is control. So this comes back. I'm thinking this is going back to Skype days, right? We're going back to 2010-ish era. But also thinking about, and I don't have that I'll just go off to memory here, is some of the hot water that Facebook got into for using the news feed in different ways as a psychological test.
That's
they
right.
Could manipulate
Exactly it.
If we make you more sad, what do you do? If we make you more happy, what do you do?
Turning that dial. Yes.
Without the user knowing.
Yep.
So in some ways, this feels similar to that, where you have a platform, a tool, whatever, that's actually that AI component sitting between the two participants, and who gets to control that to say
that
and why and then do we just walk around now going like
not trusting anything?
Like I was really trying to give the person the stink eye on Zoom,
and it was filled in out.
I got flowers the next day.
Right. So we should say very, very clearly that this was a study that was done under institutional review boards, restrictions.
Very safe.
It was all above
done.
board.
Yeah.
But you think about the consequences. So one consequence which would be very hard to police. Say you on your computer get this app that does two things. It first of all watches the body language and listens to the audio feed of the person you're interacting with, and from that it interprets in real time sort of what their emotional state is and how they're responding to you.
Yeah.
And then it subtly changes your features. You know it's doing this, but it subtly changes your features, including your voice modulation, to make sure that you are resonating with the other person.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're in a job interview.
Yeah.
So this AI is making you appear as attractive as possible to the person to the person that's interviewing you. So you can imagine somebody could create this app that you put on your own computer, very hard to police whatsoever.
Sure.
And it suddenly increases the chances of you at least getting a second interview.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and especially in those like high stake type of interactions, right? I think a job interview or any sort of interview like that is a good example, because it's usually high pressure, high stake.
Yep.
Everyone performs differently under those conditions.
You could be weeping in your place, and the face on the screen is smiling and happy.
This so much. And the other version is just like, the most
I've got it.
just no worries, cueing all the sort of like over confident cliches or something. But no, it is wild to think about that level of manipulation. But then also come back to this topic of trust again.
Yes.
Because then when, do you, as the viewer of these things, how do you start to evaluate whether you believe you're seeing the genuine response from someone or not?
That's right. And especially on that front. So if you read the paper, they've got photographs of the real person's face and the manipulated face. The changes are incredibly subtle. They're not obvious at all.
Yeah.
And yet we're so attuned to looking at somebody's facial features that they stand out. Yeah. So and actually detecting that, I can imagine, will be incredibly hard.
Yeah. Well, and there's a version of this also that falls under the category of like the deep fake element, right? And with compute, even things that are not meant to be false. I think of tools that made a big splash about a year ago with like tools like HeyGen, which would take a video of you speaking English and then it would play back and it would manipulate your mouth to even mimic the right like mouth positioning and movements of a different
so you're looking
language.
Like you're speaking another language. Yes.
A completely different language, and everything, and how incredibly smooth. So you can imagine with enough compute, enough that this could be done in real time with enough power behind it. it's wild.
Now I'm going to go to another level of scariness here, and it gets to the idea of AI agencies.
Yeah,
AI agents, sort of AI with agency.
Yeah.
So now
agentic AI.
Yes, thank you, agentic AI. That's the phrase I was struggling for.
Yeah, that's the phrase that no one understands.
Now, say hypothetical future, and we should say we're at the very beginnings of these capabilities. They're not sort of at the really scary scale yet. But now imagine a future where you've got a Zoom-like company, not Zoom because we like Zoom, I think, but a hypothetical company that has dominated the video conferencing, video meeting market, and they decide that they're so powerful that one of their goals is to increase world happiness. And they realize they could create an AI that has two things. First of all, it is given a goal, and the goal is to increase the happiness of participants in video conferences. And it is given agency, and its agency is to manipulate in real time the body language and the voice modulation of participants in these video calls. So before and after, the happiness as the AI is measuring has been elevated. And they let it out into the wild. How do we feel about that now, where a company is using AI to manipulate how large-scale populations feel?
I mean, that's wild. Because I mean, think about. Also just the exact flip. We would like more divisive.
That's right.
You go sunny and happy, and I'll take it right.
The
back.
CEO wakes up thinking, "I had a really bad day yesterday. I'm just going to press the depression button." And
yeah, like everyone should feel this. No, but I mean that's exactly it. And I mean, and I think there's a lot of precedent for this. That long run, just in terms of social media, right? I mean, because we're dealing with these. In some ways, these global social experiments with people and trying to figure out, can you change or can you manipulate entire groups of people or like into what end? I don't think that's a new thing. So, but these tools would give you a new way of
doing it
in trying to do it covertly.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
It's funny because when we were talking about this, it made me remember this sort of the Samsung moon controversy. Do you know this one?
I do, yes, but explain it, yes.
And I'm pulling, I tried to search it real quick just to make sure I didn't like completely bork the dates. But it's from essentially like the stories kind of came out last year in 2023, which was again on the heels of a marketing ploy with all, because people were competing in the smartphone era for who could do the best like night shots, right? So which is from camera perspective a very difficult thing to do with low light,
right?
But what they were touting was take amazing photos of the moon with your Samsung Galaxy whatever it was device. And so people were like, "Wow, this is amazing!" Like because normally, if you've ever taken a picture of a moon with your phone,
it's incredibly
it's so
hard,
disappointing when you're like, "That moon
this
was
little blurry blob of light."
Yeah, you're like the most beautiful large moon ever. And you look at your photo,
like
and
it's
a pin. Yeah, exactly. But people were discovering like, wow, the moon looks real in a way, right? Well, what they discovered was that they were in a sense using an AI. So it would detect that you were taking a picture of the moon and swap out the moon that you actually were photographing with
for a photo from somewhere else.
Yeah, presumably from the NASA database or something like that. But it was this idea. And again, it was one of these things I don't know. And I'm not a Samsung user. I didn't have any experience with this myself. So I don't know, for example, how transparent it was that it was doing this. But again, you run into this issue, which we can come back to. We'll come back to a different time because we could talk about just cameras and imaging forever. But you do have this question of like, I took a photo of that, but then what I see
is
has
something
been
different. How much you trust it?
Yes, and I think the big flip for me there is it wasn't making like camera adjustments for me. It put something that wasn't even there.
They're actually in there. Which is actually a nice segue back to where we started with pattern recognition with AI and the fact that it doesn't go through true reasoning. It just does stuff.
It just does
stuff. So for instance, you look at that idea of replacing your sort of fuzzy moon in a picture with something else, it's recognizing patterns. But then A, how do we trust it, as you said, but B, how do we know it's going to get it right? As we get more and more sophisticated with AI making these decisions for us, how far can it be trusted?
That's right.
How sort of accurate is that pattern recognition when it's not really reasoning?
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, one we can, I'm trying to think, how do we close this down here? We've been chatting for a while. But so here's the other thing, right? I think, which is part of that. If these systems are making those decisions, and I think if you look at them, a lot of times there is a push because they are statistical.
Yes.
There's a push to the middle, right? There's a push to some of these things. And so, especially when it comes to the sort of automation of something in there.
Right.
Well, like I might be looking at this thing that would be transformative. No one's ever done this. And the result is something everyone's done 100 times over, right?
Everybody's beautiful in photos. Everybody looks the same, apart from that one glitch where you come out dead ugly.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. So, well, I say we land this thing.
We should wrap this up. And the final thing I would say is I'm really excited where AI is going, not because what it can do, but because of those gray areas around the edge where we're actually learning stuff. But to me, that does mean we've got to learn what we can trust and what we can't trust.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that jagged edge where there's so much excitement.
Good term. Yes.
You know, a lot of fun in there. But again, with everything, right? You taking it with a grain of salt or whatever to understand and to really think critically about whatever it is. What can it really do versus what people are telling you it could do?
That's right.
And to be careful about blindly trusting, a marketing, advert or whatever, to go in there. So
great place to end.
Let's end it there. Yeah, this is great. So Andrew, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.
Fantastic,
as always.
Sean. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And again, we'll drop all of those links. This one had a lot of paper links, so we'll put those in our show notes if you want to dig through our citations. We'll see you on the next episode of Modem Futura.
See you then.